Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 106. I've got Tim Moen, a good libertarian from Canada. He's the chair of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Is that right, Tim?
I'm the former leader of the Libertarian Party, which is a little different than the chair. The leader is the guy who runs for prime minister. And then we have a party president who kind of acts more like the chair.
Okay. So that's interesting how it's structured up there. Yeah. So we're going to talk about liberty in Canada and just what's happening right now and where we think might go. And so how did you get into the Libertarian Party and become a libertarian, Tim?
Well, I mean, I had kind of a long journey here. I followed the typical route of, finding libertarian ideas, and I'm minarchist for the first 6 months, and then I became an anarchist, like a lot of us tend to do. But I talked about running for office back when I was a minarchist, and I had a bunch of anarchists tell me that's a terrible idea, and you're shooting yourself in the foot and that sort of thing. So I thought, oh yeah, you're kind of right. It's kind of like I'm tacitly supporting the system by engaging in politics. And so I disabused myself of any idea of getting involved in politics for a long time. In fact, I had written a blog about how voting was probably immoral. It's a kind of equivalent of like contracting a hitman or something like that. Like you're inciting violence by voting or something like that. So it was actually, I lived in this community in northern Alberta called Fort McMurray, which is kind of like, first of all, Alberta is kind of like the Texas of Canada because of all our oil and kind of a Western ethos, a lot of ranchers and cowboys and farmers and oilmen, that sort of thing. And then Fort McMurray was kind of the epicenter of that. And it was at the time a very geopolitical hotspot because we have all this oil. We have more oil reserves in that region of Alberta than I believe they do in Saudi Arabia. It's all tied up in oil sands or tar sands. So it was a big hotspot at the time. So we had all these environmentalists flying up from Hollywood, mostly Leonardo DiCaprio, Neil Young, and all these people coming up there to look at all the environmental degradation we were imposing on Mother Earth from this little community I lived in Fort Mac. One of my side hustles as a firefighter, every firefighter has a side hustle on his days off. And mine was, I had a film production company, a video production company. And so I made it my goal to insert myself into any team of environmentalists that would have me. And I'd shoot whatever they want, but I just wanted to be a voice of reason and like be a community booster and look at all the beautiful things we're doing in our community precisely because of the resource under our feet. Look at the environmental consciousness. Like we're leading the way on developing renewable energy sources and making oil production more efficient and producing less pollution. And, the charitable aspect of my community, we were like the most charitable per capita community in Canada. Like all these things were amazing. And so I worked with Neil Young and Daryl Hannah when they came up on this film that he was doing about his environmentally sustainable car. And, and then afterwards he went directly to Washington, DC and talked about how we were killing the planet and how it looked like Hiroshima in my community and how we were committing genocide on the First Nations people, the Native people in our region. And all of those are absolutely atrocious lies. And I was pissed off. I wrote an article about it. It got picked up by the Huffington Post. And next thing you know, I'm on the radar of some libertarians in Canada saying, hey, you should run for office. And I was very resistant. I said, no, I'll refer you to this blog I wrote a number of months ago about explaining why engaging in politics is immoral. And they just kept kept whittling away at me. And one guy just kind of said, look, Tim, are you going to tell me that Ron Paul is a force for evil in this world? Seriously? I mean, he's standing on that stage saying all the things you're saying in your blog spots and in your little videos. But he's just doing it to a larger audience because he's standing on that stage. Are you telling me there's not more libertarians in the world because Ron Paul stood on that stage using the political system as a megaphone? And I couldn't argue with that. I'm like, yeah, I have. You're absolutely right. I mean, it would be like it'd be like an atheist who thinks that belief in God is a terrible idea and leads to bad consequences, refusing an invitation to stand at a mega church pulpit and talk to the congregation about their belief in God, right? And how irrational it is, or something like that. I mean, you don't turn down ideas like that. You should embrace it. If you think your ideas are serious, like, stand in front of that audience and deliver the message. So I agreed. I said, okay, look, and this was back in 2014. And there was no election on the horizon for, I think, a year and a half, no federal election. So I knew I had about a year and a half to figure out exactly how this even works. How do I even run? I don't even know the process. Well, 2 days after I made that commitment to the Libertarian Party, my member of parliament resigned, and we had a by-election for his spot. And so I was immediately thrown into a by-election within 2 days, and I had no idea what I was doing. This was 2014 and memes were starting to become a thing. So I threw a bunch of memes at the wall. I had a couple of people come to my community to help me out. One guy flew in from Ottawa to help me out. He became my de facto campaign manager because the poker tables were hot in Fort McMurray. He was a poker player. He figured he'd take all the money off those oil workers and at night and run my campaign in the day. And it worked out nicely for him. But I just had this ragtag group of people just trying to figure out how to run for politics. And next thing you know, I'm blowing up because this one meme we put out there that said, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. It picked up all this traction and it got me on Fox News and CNN, and our state broadcaster here in Canada picked it up and made fun of it on their comedy show. And so I'm just vaulted into the public spotlight, and I kind of become the talk of politics in Canada. And our party just happened to be having nominations for leader, the guy who would run for prime minister, essentially, in the next 2 months. And because of my popularity, I was nominated, I accepted, and I just kind of found myself in like 2 short months going from politics is evil, never step foot in it, you're tacitly supporting evil if you engage in it, to running for prime minister. And it was just kind of a serendipitous series of events that led me there. And I had I led the party to its most successful, I guess, federal run in 2015 in our 40 some year history. And I kind of stuck around. I probably overstayed my time as leader. I'm not really a maintainer. I'm more of a builder, but it was a blast, wild ride for about 6 years there.
Yeah, well, there's really that much oil up in Fort McMurray. Wow, Fort McMurray, I didn't realize that. And that's for obviously everybody doesn't know, that's way up in northern Alberta. It's way north of Edmonton, and you really get into no man's land when you go up there.
Fort McMurray is basically the end of the road in Alberta. I mean, there's nothing really north of that. In the winter, there's a winter road that goes up to a First Nations community called Fort Chip, but you have to wait for it to freeze or else you sink in the bog. So, those people are truly cut off up there in Fort Chipewyan. But yeah, Fort McMurray is basically the end of the road. It's as far as you can drive north on the eastern side of Alberta, and it's just all oil reserves and unspoiled wilderness, basically.
Yeah, I've heard it's a different, of course, they called the hockey team in Edmonton the Oilers, and I've heard, though, it's a different kind of oil. It's a little bit harder to extract.
Yeah, it's like tar, it's literal oil, and it's seeping right out of the banks of the river. Like, you'll see veins of this stuff, and on a hot summer day, it'll actually start oozing like tar down the sides of the bank. So some of us like to say it's like the biggest environmental cleanup in the world, right? We're actually taking this stuff, injecting steam into it, getting this oil out of this sand and returning the sand back into the nature and using the oil we extract from it for energy.
I guess you could say maybe it's a little bit like the Jed Clampett oil, but
well, a little bit. Yeah. It's a little bit harder to get it. I mean, we can't just shoot into the ground and have it bubbling up like, but
from the credits of the Beverly Hillbillies. But anyway, so have you always been in Alberta, or you've been all over Canada?
Well, I've lived in Alberta most of my life. Yeah. I mean, the first 5 years of my life I was in the lower mainland BC around Vancouver, but my mom married a farmer in northern Alberta, and I grew up as a kind of a northern Alberta farm boy. And I've lived in Alberta ever since. But of course, I've been across the whole country, as a politician and just as a tourist. So I've been to every province, every territory. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is totally non-political, but I've asked other people this. I said, do you remember exactly when and where you were when you heard about Wayne Gretzky being sold to LA?
Oh man, I remember the time.
I remember because it was just so shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, leaving Edmonton, it's just like, you can't break up at the Edmonton Oilers. It's like,
I know. It was a terrible time in our province's history. It was, we went Edmonton used to be called the City of Champions because we had the champion hockey team for a number of years, the champion football team. Of course, it was a CFL, not the NFL, but it's fallen off. Although, this year we're hoping we can turn that around. We have the world's best hockey player again, and Connor McDavid, and he's got a pretty good team around him. We went pretty far in the playoffs last year, and I think this year could be a good year. Maybe we'll be back to our old glory days again. That
was arguably one of the greatest. I mean, they actually managed to win the Stanley Cup once without him. I mean, there wasn't a greater hockey team.
It was stacked. It was stacked. That's for sure.
And to their credit, Edmonton is the only team that was part of the WHA that is still stayed in its original city. All the others have either moved or whatever. They let four into the league, and because it's actually one of the smallest markets, isn't it?
Well, I guess in terms of population of Edmonton and that it serves, but I would suspect in terms of rabid fans, it's probably one of the biggest markets, right? Because that's all we have in Alberta is hockey. And people here live for it. So,
but you've got the great rivalry with the Calgary Flames, of course. But but anyway, well, let's get back to politics.
Sure.
Yeah, Alberta's people often, sometimes I've heard Alberta described as the Texas of Canada, or some people said, Texas is the Alberta of America. I mean, it seems like it's definitely a different. What are the differences among the? What are the differences for the provinces politically? Because it seems like Alberta sends all this, generates all this revenue from the oils and stuff. But it sounds like, first of all, that they pay more to Ottawa than they get back from Ottawa. Is that correct? Or
I mean, we have this equalization formula, kind of the idea of equalization is kind of baked into our constitution. The idea that the have-not provinces get bolstered by the have provinces. But politically, I mean, it's kind of like the West Coast of Canada is very similar to the West Coast of the USA politically. Then we have Alberta and Saskatchewan, which are kind of like the Midwest / Texas. Winnipeg is kind of centrist. And then we get into Ontario, and Ontario, it's a little bit like California in that the rural areas swing pretty hard right, but it also has the like bastion, the seat of power of Canada, right? And the elites, we call them the Laurentian elites because it's I guess St. Lawrence or whatever river area that they kind of all congregate around there. That's the seat of power of Canada, and they kind of run things, and they think they're better than everyone, and they have all the plans. And then you get into Quebec. Quebec is a very kind of proud, almost a nation within a nation. I mean, they've been close to separating on numerous occasions. They have a very strong, like almost aspirational nationalist tendency. They're very proud of their Quebecois, their French heritage, and they kind of rally around that and their language and their common culture. And then we move into the Maritimes, and are typically it's a rough economically because their economy has typically been tied to the ocean and maritime industry and fishing and that sort of thing, and that's kind of fallen on hard times for a lot of years, a large part thanks to Canadian government's quotas on fishing and management of fish fleets, taking away kind of the former property rights fishermen had and their incentive to maintaining stock, and created policies that resulted in overfishing those waters. So what we end up seeing, especially in Alberta, is we see a lot of economic refugees, particularly from Newfoundland, end up in Alberta because that's where the economic opportunities are. And then they'll go on, unemployment insurance, and they'll get their unemployment. Once they qualify for unemployment, they'll take their nest egg, go back to Newfoundland for a few months, live off their unemployment and their savings, and they'll come back and forth from basically Alberta to Newfoundland. Actually, my wife was one of those economic refugees who came to Alberta for better opportunities, and so I'm married to a good Newfie gal myself. So that's kind of Alberta, but or Canada in a nutshell. But really, in terms of voting for things that you and I might like to see in terms of policy, there's not a lot. You're looking at Alberta and Saskatchewan and maybe a little bit of Manitoba and some rural parts of BC and Ontario. But other than that, this is a largely left-leaning country. I mean, even you look at the latest polls in our conservative government, our Conservative Party of Canada, I think it's polling at around, it's ahead in the polls. It's around 39%. But there's really no other parties on the right splitting its vote. I mean, there's the People's Party of Canada, which is Maxime Bernier, has kind of been an upstart, but they're splitting the vote maybe 3 or 4% of the vote. But on the left, what you have is the Liberals, a few percent behind the Conservatives at, I think it was like 34% or something like that, and then you have the NDP with 20-some% and the Green Party, and you have all these left-wing parties splitting the left-wing vote. But if you tally up left-wing versus right-wing votes or voting intentions in Canada, it skews largely left. So even our Conservative Party ends up having very leftist policies, compared to the Republican Party, say in the States.
Yeah, and so there's the NDP is the National
Democratic Party. You can think of it as kind of like the Labour Party in the UK. It's a lot of socialists in that party.
How does the People's Party differ from the Libertarian Party of Canada? I've got my guesses, but
yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of ways, you'd have to ask Max Bernier that, because I had been talking with Bernier for over about a year after he lost, because if you remember, Bernier ran for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. A bunch of us libertarians actually encouraged him to do that. We flew him out to Western Canada and connected him with a bunch of people and fundraisers and politicos out here to show him that, because he was from Quebec, and typically politicians from Quebec, people with a strong French accent, don't get very much support or positive support in Western Canada. We've been screwed over by guys like that a lot of times. Yeah. But we wanted to show Max that we could brand him as the Albertan from Quebec kind of thing, because he has a lot of our values. He believes in markets. He constantly quotes Mises and Hayek and these guys. So our impression was he was probably a libertarian in conservatives' clothing, and at any rate, it would do us well to have a liberty-friendly politician leading the Conservative Party. My thinking was, we need to get libertarian ideas on that national debate stage. And it would serve a guy like Bernier, who might be a libertarian in disguise, to have a crazy guy like me standing beside him, making him look like a moderate. This is kind of a classic political strategy, right? If you're standing on that stage, you want to look like the reasonable guy. And so it serves Justin Trudeau well to have a nut bar like Elizabeth May way to his left, spouting all sorts of nonsense about environmental catastrophe and this sort of thing, so that when Trudeau introduces a climate policy in the debate that is far more moderate than what Elizabeth May wants, he sounds like the reasonable guy. Without Elizabeth May, his climate policy sounds like the wacky idea, right? While the right needed someone like this on that debate stage, so that they could pull the Overton window further towards what I think of as liberty. So we had this. We really wanted to get Max up there because we thought that might be our way to get to the debate stage, to make him look like a moderate centrist compared to without us up there. But of course, Max lost by like a couple percent. And so right after that, I invited him to take my spot as leader of the party. Of course, we'd have to go through a convention and that sort of thing and have members vote. But I mean, he was a popular, charismatic, kind of famous guy in Canada. So he would have easily swept into leadership. And so for a year, I tried to convince him to dump the zeros and get with heroes and take over my spot as leader of the party. And I was looking to get out of politics as well. I cashed in my pension to run for prime minister. I needed it to fund me for a year. It's not like I was making any money. I mean, it was costing me an arm and a leg to, I had to pay my bills and keep my family afloat while I was doing this volunteer work of, running for the party. So I was looking for an exit strategy to get back to my career and making money. And I thought Max would be the perfect guy to take it to the next level. And he hummed and hawed. And then, after a year, he decided to start his own party, which kind of confused me. It's like, okay, well, there's already a Libertarian Party. The mechanism's all there. You could step right in, have the fundraising, have the party structure to support you. I don't understand. And why are you naming it this weird name, the People's Party? That sounds like a commie name to me. It's blowing me away, and of course he was trying to capture, I think, the populist ethos or something like that, or the zeitgeist, the rise of populism, right? And their main concern was immigrants and globalists and all these things. So he kind of went off on that. So and then there was actually talk about merging the parties. A mutual friend of Max and I said, hey, you guys should merge. There's a lot of overlap in your messaging. And Max was very interested in that because he wasn't able to issue tax receipts to his donors yet, because he hadn't had a candidate run. He wasn't a full-fledged party. And so merging with us would allow him to issue tax receipts. So we started talking about it. Of course, the first thing I wanted to do was find out, okay, what do you believe, Max? Are you a libertarian or not? But the first thing he wanted to talk about was who owns your party? How is it incorporated? What are the articles of incorporation say? Which I thought was really strange at the time. I'm like, well, I don't get it. We're just a political party registered with Elections Canada. He's like, no, political parties are also registered corporations. And we couldn't find any articles of incorporation. He's like, are you a for-profit? Are you nonprofit? Are you charitable? Oh my God. We couldn't. Our party isn't registered as a corporation. It's a political party registered with. So, and shortly after that conversation, the deal died. So I don't know what to think of Bernier. You can look up and see that his articles of incorporation for his party, him and two other guys are the owners of that party. In other words, if the party goes tits up, or goes, all the money in it goes to him and these guys, and all the resources and things like that. Maybe that's a good strategy. I mean, certainly the typical party strategy with all its political infighting and stuff hasn't necessarily been great. I mean, there's pros and cons to it. He's basically the owner of the party, and what he says goes. And, you know, they have these kind of kangaroo affirmations of leadership. But at the end of the day, if he ever lost one of those, I mean, the party wouldn't go on without him, put it that way, because he owns it. So, you know, part of the cynic in me thinks that, well, maybe this is just kind of a grifting operation for him. And, you know, he's got his 6-figure MP pension, and he's got his Privy Council pension, you know, so he's making a lot of money that, and he's also able to pull 6 figures as leader of this populist party because of the fundraising he can pull in. And so this is a good grift for him to keep going. So for a while I was a little bit cynical. I thought, well, okay, maybe like he's actually a libertarian, but he's kind of playing to the populace because it's a good grift. That's, you know, why narrow yourself down to the purebloods when you can get this other base? But here's what I would say, and here's something I've noticed with so the PPC is a populist party. Libertarians, of course, are populist too, but we're very strictly defined populists. We have principles behind it, and the PPC, it's not clear what their principles are. So, for example, he's against any climate policies. And this was on their webpage because there's no climate emergency. Well, that's a little bit different than libertarian, because a libertarian is against climate policies, even if there is a climate emergency, and maybe even especially if there's a climate emergency, right? He's against these lockdowns and mandates because coronavirus isn't that fatal and the vaccine isn't effective. Well, we're against those things, even if the vaccine, or even if the virus is 100% fatal and the vaccine is 100% effective, we're against the mandate. So, you know, and then like yesterday, just to give you another example, we had this 1 million, it was called a 1 million march in Canada. And these are parents who are rightfully outraged about some of the gender ideology stuff that's going on.
Like Billboard Chris.
Right.
Yeah, I know he's
right. And so these people are marching around with signs that say, you know, hands off my kids, our kids, right? Well, okay. Again, this is an example of how populists get it half right, right? It's like going around with signs saying, change your spots, leopard, or go vegan, wolf. You know, it's like, that's the purpose of school, is to corrupt your kids' minds and to interrupt the parental thing. Like you're literally handing your kids off to an institution whose job it is to do the nasty thing it's doing to your kid, and you're expecting to reform them, right? Well, you can't reform it. It's an evil institution. But this is where, you know, populists are like halfway there. So the PPC is like, it diagnoses, or it recognizes that there's a problem in the same way we recognize there's a problem, but its solution is we need to use the government to fix that problem. You know, we have immigrants jacking up the price of thing. We have cultural problems. The problem is we need the government to solve this problem called immigration. Well, I can admit that immigration could be a problem, but I also think that government is the biggest problem, and immigration is only a problem because of the government forcing association with other people, right? That's the only reason I care about someone moving from point A to point B 3,000 kilometers away from me on Roxham Road on some deserted Quebec road. So my solution was, okay, let's figure out a way to get government out of immigration, and you know, so we're looking at like Hans Hermann Hoppe approaches, like sponsorship only and different things like that, to get government out of it. And the People's Party is throwing out arbitrary numbers, like 100,000 people feels right. Well, what if the 100,001th person is the neurosurgeon that's going to save my son's life? Can he please immigrate? You know, so it's just, so the difference is we see the primary problem as the state. That's the root of all evil. It's the thing that causes gender, like all these screwed up ideologies that are being promoted right now. These serve the state, and you're trying to use the very institution that's responsible for all these things to fix these things. Whereas libertarians are saying, no, let's strike the root. And so as far as I can tell, that's the main difference. But
there's also, at least in America, there's kind of this attitude that it was like, Bill Clinton is proposing these policies, and they would try to fight these policies by talking about his sex life. It's
Right.
just so, what I hate about it is it's so ideological, and you just concede the field of ideas to the bad guys. And I don't, and not to mention, it's also proven to be a failed strategy. It never works.
Yeah.
If a politician is proposing a bad healthcare bill and you start talking about a sex life, that doesn't stop the healthcare bill. And it really makes you look really silly. Tim, I've got to say, and I don't know, obviously, your liberty movement is different, but I'm very, very concerned about the growth of immigration derangement syndrome.
Right.
I think it is becoming a serious problem, people ask me, why do you want open borders? And I said, well, the main reason why I want open borders is so I can leave. And there are probably more Canadian libertarians who have left Canada than American libertarians who have left America. Yeah. Well, per capita at least. Probably. I mean, lots of Canadian libertarians have left Canada, but they still want to at least have the option to go back easily, or it's because every time you create more of a police state at the border, it impacts everybody, not just it just makes it harder for everybody, even citizens who want to get back into the country. We had this nonsense where citizens couldn't even go back to I don't know if that was the case in Canada, but some cases citizens couldn't go back to their own countries because of this corona nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's absolutely insane. I see the same thing here. Immigrants are blamed for everything. And look, I'm sympathetic to the idea that under the current state of things, probably doesn't help to have a huge migrant crisis and a huge wave of immigrants that we don't have the infrastructure to support, all living in government-funded hotels and sucking up the tax, no incentive to integrate into the culture. All these things are problems, and they're problems not of a person moving from point A to point B. They're problems of government programs. And so I can get behind the idea. Like I think that open borders and closed borders are both status programs, right? Like on the one hand, a libertarian can say, and rightfully so, that look, all these road rules are bullshit because they're enforced by violence and by the road owner, and by, he's not even the rightful road owner. But maybe the right answer isn't, well, we need zero road rules. No, we probably just need private road owners so that we get the right rule set emerge, right? And I look at kind of what's happening now in the same way. I heard someone describe it as anarcho tyranny, right? This idea that what you're seeing in a lot of big cities now, and we're seeing it in Canada, I'm sure you're seeing it in a lot of places in the States, just lawlessness, right? Like crimes, just let go, let people steal stuff, let them do it. Well, I don't call that, I think anarcho tyranny is the wrong term. I think that state imposed lawlessness is what it is. And it's a state saying, we have a monopoly over rules and rule enforcement. We have a monopoly on owning the public, on owning public infrastructure, and we're not going to have any rules here at all. It's going to be a free for all. Well, no private property owner would do that. A private property owner would stop thieves. They would have some rules of conduct. They would say, look, no, you can't walk around naked. You can't be a pervert to kids. You can't do drugs openly, illicit drugs, and walk around drunk in this park that's open to the public, because it's my park. And I want it to be attractive to people. So libertarians are kind of, I think in a lot of ways, we've been our own worst enemy, because we've been rightfully perceived as being against rules. And so now it's like, look, libertarians, this is the world you want. It's libertarian tyranny out there right now. No rules. Everyone just kind of doing what they want. Right. Well, and so I kind of use the same tact when I look at the border. I'm like, you're right. I mean, there is something like pseudo property here. Like roads aren't not property. They're not quite property either. Infrastructure, parks, cities, they're not property, even though the government owns them. So how do we deal with this situation in the state we're in right now, dealing with like a mass flood of migrants that would be treated much differently in a libertarian? That there would not be quote unquote open borders in a libertarian world where all property, all territory is privately owned, right? There would be much more open freedom of movement for some people and much more closed freedom of movement for other people, ultimately be up to the property owners. And so, but right now we're in a paradigm that doesn't allow that. So I've kind of fallen in the Hans Herman Hoppe camp now of, okay, what's the way that the least worst solution to get government out of this and try to get closer to a market and closer to a libertarian world so that we don't have to deal with these policy questions anymore.
Well, are you going to put birdseed out and then sit by there and for example, make sure that only the sparrows can get to the birdseed,
right? And
then you're going to shoot the blue jays or shoot the pigeons. And I mean that's so absurd. But that's basically. I mean, I hear all these people, and they don't do anything to get rid of the welfare state. But I also realize though now that these so-called progressives or leftists or prodigals, that they are completely and totally conservative now. If your definition of conservative is, because one person said conservatism is that you have one group that the law binds and does not protect, and you have one group that the law protects and does not bind. What the left wants is they want somebody to be able to go into the grocery store and steal a pack of cigarettes or beer or whatever. And yet if I pull a gun on him, I'm going to get arrested. So therefore, stealing the pack of cigarettes, the law protects you, but it does not bind you. But the store owner, the law binds, he pays taxes, but it does not protect. The left is totally and completely conservative now. They have went totally to the other side. There's almost no way that they're not conservative anymore. And really, curiously enough, people in the 20s some libertarians in the 20s were arguing that socialism was conservative. It is conservative. We number one, we cannot, and the greatest mistake that was ever made was allowing them to steal the word liberal from us. I think that was a horrible mistake, and it still is and even pretend. But anyway. Where are most Canadian immigrants coming from? I mean, obviously you don't have a border with Mexico. I mean, and I don't think you're getting that many American immigrants, but are they coming from other Commonwealth countries or what?
That's a good question. Like myself, I don't see. Well, okay. So for example, Vancouver gets a lot of Chinese immigrants. One of the things that is driving up real estate prices in Vancouver is that we have wealthy Chinese oligarchs buying up all the real estate in Vancouver. And then a lot of these apartments sit empty most of the year. They're just empty luxury properties that sit empty as these oligarchs go back to China to run their empires and different things like that. And so the average Canadian, is cut out. So Vancouver is full of these the wealthy and the drug addicts, right? It's like this huge dichotomy. It's like the lowest of the low and the highest of the high, but there's no one from the middle that, people in the middle are struggling to
it does sound like San Francisco, but of course, how much is this also impacted by building codes and
of course,
and zoning and all this other stuff?
Right.
Again, another thing, we'll blame the immigrants. Nope. Actually it's, immigrant hater, the IDS people, the immigrant, they're always complaining about, well, we're complaining about these rich immigrants. We're complaining about these poor immigrants. It's just, what is obviously these Chinese people aren't going on welfare.
I'm sympathetic to the idea that we have, essentially Chinese state actors buying up all this real estate, right? People that are making their money off of violence, coercion, criminal, what we would consider criminal activity, buying up all the real estate, making it impossible. I'm sympathetic to that. But, someone tried to blame the high price of real estate on immigrants on Twitter the other day. And I'm like, look, for example, I live in an area where there's hardly any immigrants. Like, I live in Alberta. We have a few. I mean, we get a lot of Filipinos here who come to work the low paying job at the Tim Hortons and the different places like that where Canadians don't want to work them. But, our real estate prices went up hugely in the last 3 years in my region. That's not because of Chinese immigrants or whatever immigrants. There was hardly any immigration happening in my community. What drove the prices up was central banking and government spending, as well as the scarcity, right? So it was artificially low interest rates. We also have a scarcity. Like if you look at a map of Canada, how much empty fucking space is there?
Chris?
It's like there's crown land everywhere. And I look at my community and I'm like, okay, why are we only allowed to develop lots and build houses on this narrow section of land? Like, look at all the land around this community. Why can't we build there? Why can't we build there? Why can't the farmer who is on the outskirts of town subdivide his land and sell off and make his own subdivisions there? So all those, so there's a huge amount of scarcity created because the government simply won't let us homestead land.
And you're in a section of Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, also that is very flat.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, the further north you got to deal with the cold, but it should be very easy to build and develop, and easy to build roads, easy to do all that stuff. I mean, I would certainly expect British Columbia to be more expensive just because British Columbia is not flat at all.
Yeah.
But, it's, you can build the highways. It's just so much easier to build the infrastructure.
Absolutely. I mean, and so now we have to explain, so the populace will say, we need to shut down immigration. Look at how much house prices have gone up in Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta in the last 3 years. Yeah. Well, that's not because of immigration, dum-dum. That's because of central banks. I mean, that's the one variable that changed. They dropped the interest rate to pretty much at zero. And that made credit available to everyone. And homeowners took advantage and sold at what you idiots would pay for it, because your monthly, you base your purchase decisions off your monthly payment. So yes, of course, house prices are high now. And so, now we're in a conundrum. So do we keep house prices high? If you believe in the idea of central, that governments and central banks ought to control the money supply in the economy. Well, now what do you do if you're government or central bank? Now that old Tim here has bought a very expensive house when everything peaked, I don't want the prices to go down. I want them to keep going up.
Yeah.
Okay. But what about my son who is just entering the workforce and wants to buy a house? Well, I want things to be cheap for him. So which policy do you choose? This is the shit that the government has to.
A problem when you have, there isn't any homeowner who wants to, pay $1 million for a house and then have that house be 200,000 10 years later.
Right.
So you've created this interest group that wants to keep everything inflated. And and maybe they realize, yes, there is a problem here. It's really the incentives are so perverse, and I don't know how you fix them up. I never did ask you, but is there anything worth talking about way up north in Canada? Above the 60th parallel, I mean.
Right. Well, I mean,
anybody lives there, but
we've had unprecedented forest fires in the Northwest Territories, or a lot of like that whole territory was pretty much evacuated because of forest fires lately. So again, here's an example of you can't have an objective, rational conversation about these things because politics is injected into everything, right? On the one hand, it's a sign of climate catastrophe, and what we need to do is tax people harder. And so we've got the left screaming about Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, going up to the territories to do an axe the tax rally. He's talking about axing the carbon tax. How dare he? How idiotic that he wants to abolish climate change while they're in the middle of a climate emergency. Well, maybe these people want cheaper energy so that they can deal with the harsh climate and the climate catastrophe that's supposedly befalling them right now. I mean, it'd be nice to have affordable gas as they're fleeing these things, or, the ability to heat their home in like -40 weather. And then on the other side, you have people saying these are Jewish space lasers or arson or something like that. It's all a big government conspiracy doing that. And, and look, I'm a firefighter, so I've personally fought like 6 wildfires this year. They were all human cause. We know what the cause was. They were unintentional. One was a car caught on fire and pulled it over, caught the ditch on fire, caught the forest on fire. The other one was a welder doing some work in his yard, caught the grass on fire, it spread into the trees. Another one was, farmers up here do burning they'll clear a bunch of land, pile up the trees, and then wait till winter. And then in the dead of winter, they'll burn these giant piles of logs. Well, sometimes those gets into the duff and it'll stay smoldering there. And then when it gets dry enough, it'll come out. So we had a couple of fires like that started by these brush burnings that had happened in the middle of winter. Another was a road crew. So all these are human cause. So the right will look at that and go, oh, that was a human cause. Look at this arson, right? Because they say human cause and they think, so look at these arsonists. It's all a coordinated arson effort in order to try to tax us. Well, I'm looking at it as a firefighter, and I'm out in the bush every fire season because we're dealing with wildland stuff. And this year has been particularly hot and dry. We had a fast snow melt. We didn't have any rain to speak of in May and June. And so the weather made it dry. Now, so all these fires started within close proximity of each other because while these things happen every day, people weld, people do road work, people burn brush. These all cause fires at the same time because the conditions were hot and dry enough that they all happen to catch fire. Now, if those things were to happen today, if that person was to weld or do road work or his car catch on fire, they wouldn't start a brush fire because we've had some moisture and, things are green. So this has to do with, it does have to do with the climate and the weather. I don't know if it's a sign of climate catastrophe. I don't know if this means that oil companies are to blame for these fires, but I don't have to be closed-minded to the idea that this could be because of climate change, because if it is climate change, my solution is still the same. It's get rid of government. We need to stop this. We need to liberalize fossil fuels so that we can have the energy to power our pumps to fight these fires, to adapt to the changing environment. We can't have all the policies that the government are imposing do not help us deal with the changing climate. They only hinder us. But I'm open to see that. So people on the right don't, they can't admit that there might be climate change happening, and people on the left can't imagine. The people on the left and right all agree that if there is an emergency, we damn well need the government. And the right doesn't want there to be an emergency because they don't want there to be government involvement here. Well, I'm saying no. Even if there is an emergency, we don't need the government. Anyway, sorry, I went on a tangent.
Yeah, I would think also that the going out and being the pioneer would naturally instill the libertarian spirit in people, though.
Yes.
When you have to go out and build your cabin in the woods and shoot the bear, protect yourself from the bears.
Yeah.
And other things like that. It's regrettable, that Canada has become such an anti-gun country, because obviously there are places like this where you definitely need to have a rifle.
Oh yeah.
You need to have a gun because you don't want this.
Where I grew up, I mean, bears would come right onto our front porch and eat the dog's food, and numerous times my dad would have to kick the door open to budge the bear back and shoot him basically point blank off the deck. You needed a gun. And not to mention, you were an hour or more away from cops. So, and theft was an issue. And so, a number of times you'd have people driving down our driveway that we didn't recognize the vehicle. My dad would just stand out on the porch with his gun. The person would slowly back away. Okay. Yeah. They weren't friendly because a friend would have just kept coming and we would have recognized them and gun would have gone away. It's a necessary tool. And of course, it's just like in the US. Really, the divide is urban and rural, right? It's not, like rural parts of Canada are very self-sufficient and don't have much need for government. And urban parts of Canada want the more government, the better kind of thing. And they want to project that onto all of Canada. So, yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of that I can't remember who, I think Nassim Taleb quoted someone, and he said, I'm a libertarian at the national level, a Republican at the state level, a Democrat at the municipal level, a socialist at the family level, and to each according to their need, from each according to their ability, communist at the level of my dog. And I don't agree with that, but it's an interesting. It raises an interesting insight, which is, look, people who live on top of each other in the city have a much different relationship and much more need for there to be rules in place to deal with that, right? I don't need any rules when I'm living out alone on the farm. I just need to know where the edge of my property is. We basically need trespassing and theft rules. But in the city, okay, we're living on top of each other. There needs to be a bit more. And so people in the city are much more friendly to government because, if there weren't rules of conduct, and you don't litter and don't flash people and, different things like that, it would be a much worse place to live. But of course, libertarians would say, look, that's why it needs to be private property and not state-owned infrastructure, because that's where the best rules will emerge, the ones that are most attractive, that make it most habitable, they create the most flourishing for everyone.
You mentioned you're a firefighter. I assume you work for some type of government agency there. Is that correct? Or
absolutely, yeah. So I'm a municipal firefighter. I'm a firefighter paramedic, and so half my job is working for the municipality as a firefighter, and then on the days when I'm on the ambulance, we actually are contracted to the province because we have a provincial health system, and so we become essentially an extension of an extension of this giant bureaucracy, Alberta Health Services, where of course you're treated like you're treated like that. You're not a practitioner exercising their clinical judgment on calls. You're an extension of the state's will and an object of compliance, and you are judged as such. So there's never any metrics about what are your patient outcomes, did your patient like the service, that sort of thing. It's like, how well did you follow the letter of our rules? And that's what you're judged on.
I've generally noticed that firemen seem to be they're almost all of them though are definitely true public servants, and they have the attitude also that they are public servants, that this isn't just a paycheck, but because I guess you wouldn't do something that's that risky if you didn't want to serve the public.
That's right. And I think it's also too that we see the immediate results of our work, right? Yeah. So if we're rescuing someone, if we're helping someone in a medical emergency, I mean, we get immediate gratification from seeing that we actually did something valuable. I mean, it's valuable in objective reality. Now, do I like how we get paid? Do I like the involuntary nature I have with my clients, so to speak? No. And so myself, I take it an extra notch, and I reckon, and I'm sensitive to that, just like I am with my kids. Like, they didn't choose me as a dad. And so, I on my wedding ring, I got a replica of the Lord, the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings, because I wanted to remind myself that power can corrupt. I have an involuntary nature. So I want to treat my kids as if they could have any father in the world, they would choose me as their father. And I take that same attitude with my clients. Like, I want them to, if they had a choice, they'd want me as their firefighter or paramedic. So, but the other thing is we're not rule enforcers like the police, right? So we're not, we don't have to corrupt our minds into thinking what we're doing is good while we bust kneecaps, because what we're doing is actually something that, if you believe in a government that should protect people, that's kind of what we do. And so that's nice. But whereas I think a lot of public servants, they're not in the job of protecting people. They're in the job of making sure that people are doing what the state wants.
Well, you might not. I mean, if you see something that's kind of dangerous, you wouldn't at least point out, hey, that's kind of dangerous. You might want to do something else. It's I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, people like to sometimes chalk it up to like
Yeah.
a noble instinct that we have that made
Yeah.
us get into this profession, or we're cut from a different cloth or something
Yeah.
like that. And a lot of firefighters like to believe that stuff about themselves as well, because it gets them a lot of brownie points and gets them laid a lot more. I look at things a little bit more soberly. Growing up, I bought a hang glider out of the classified ads and tied it behind the pickup and tried to fly it behind my pickup truck. I bungee jumped. I did all these crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a thrill seeker. I like to wade into chaos and deal with it and confront it and survive. I get a rush out of that. So, yes, I love the fact that I'm helping people. But I really love the fact that I'm doing something dangerous. I'm just wired that way, right? I'd be doing something dangerous even if I wasn't helping people. So, it's a win-win, because, people benefit from my love of doing kind of risky, dangerous things. But, I don't think I'm some kind of like noble, sacrificial person. Obviously doing dangerous things, that one of these days it could get you, right? Like I could crash my hang glider, or I could fall through the floor and get trapped in a fire, and that's it. And that's happened to me. But you make peace with the fact that you go out doing something you love, and that's
what movie or TV show do you think portrays your profession accurately, and what one gets it completely wrong?
Oh man. Well, okay. The one that probably is the closest to reality in terms of fictional TV shows is Rescue Me with Dennis Leary. You ever see that one?
I've not seen that one.
Yeah, that one is, because it shows all the warts behind the pistache of the hero that is portrayed by like Chicago Fire and Backdraft and all these ones that make us out to be this, if you go, we go kind of thing, right? So Rescue Me is guys going through divorce and having like affairs and having messy things go on and like breaking some rules and like not being totally morally upstanding and like giving each other, like taking the piss out of each other. There's a lot of taking the piss out of each other at the fire station. A lot of it is very politically incorrect. You would never show something like that on a Chicago Fire or a Rescue 911 or these fire TV shows. But Dennis Leary, I think he comes from a firefighting family. He understands the culture, and so that show actually gets it right. And then there is a new show that just came on. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it basically follows LA County firefighters around on a day in, day out basis. And I mean, that's our job. Like that's very, if you want to see exactly what firefighter culture is, that show pretty much nails it, because you're actually seeing it. You're seeing that the probie, for example, trying to earn their spot and having to cook all the dinner and do all the presentations and all the training and like juggling two things while the other older guys kind of take the piss out of them. Like that is what happens at every fire department in North America. And you see that on that show.
Yeah. I naturally was thinking about Emergency, but I don't know if you'd have any comment on that.
Oh yeah. Emergency. Well, I mean, definitely it was shows like that wanted me that wanted to get me into it, right? Like with Johnny and Roy.
And that was the first show that really made the whole idea of having paramedics, because there weren't paramedics before then. It actually made a difference in that. Yeah. But anyway,
I watched that and I thought, oh man, it'd be so cool to be one of those guys. And so I mean, those shows are definitely fun, and they have there's truisms about them, right? Like but they definitely it's like anything in Hollywood. It kind of portrays these careers in a light that isn't completely realistic. But
who are some of the great libertarian heroes in Canadian history? I mean, any time in Canadian history, because
well, I mean, there was oh man, I'm trying to think now. There we haven't really had any. I mean, we had a prime minister once who was kind of a classical liberal, Wilfrid Laurier.
Laurier.
Yeah. I mean, But at the same time, I believe he was
I thought it was
responsible for.
Wilfrid Laurier, but yeah.
Let me just double check. I should know this. Jeez.
Yeah.
That's Wilfrid Laurier.
Yeah, Wilfrid Laurier.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, freedom. Canada's about freedom, and freedom is our nationality, or something like that was his quote. There's him. Isabel. I'm trying to remember if Isabel
Patterson.
Patterson was Canadian.
Oh yeah, she was a Canadian, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's definitely up there. But I don't think most Canadians know about her or consider.
The God of the Machine is one of the great libertarian classics that should definitely be read.
Right. Oh, and then actually one of the people, one of the first libertarians I read was a guy who grew up and lived in Edmonton, Konkin, who wrote.
Oh, Konkin's from. I did not know that.
Yeah, he's from. Konkin. Yeah, he literally grew up like 10 minutes from where I'm currently doing this podcast from.
And also a lot of the people who were originally in Ayn Rand's circle were from Winnipeg or around that area, like Nathaniel Brandon and Barbara Brandon, and
right.
they were Canadians.
Well, and I think Walter Block is. I don't know if he's. Yeah, I mean he lives in Vancouver half the year, so I don't know if he's originally. You don't know him?
I know who Walter Block is, but I don't. I mean, but he's from Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think you're right because he went to school with Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, he's definitely. I mean, he might live in Canada, but I'd consider. Yeah, I'm thinking more people, because. And some of these other people, I think, who might have been libertarian have seemed to have gone more over the People's Party way. I mean, like, Lauren Southern. I've heard theories on why Lauren Southern is less libertarian than she used to be, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, she always had a populist edge. I mean, you have to remember she grew up listening to, Fox News and really revering Ann Coulter and people like these and that theory. So, so I think, she was conservative with some libertarian leanings. So I think the People's Party was probably maybe a good fit for her. But I mean, even when she was my candidate running in 2015, when we had some issues with her, people complaining. Because she would go to a slut walk as a libertarian candidate and say there's no rape culture in Canada, and I'm like, what? I don't get this. To me, this is kind of like going to the Special Olympics and saying you guys aren't great athletes, dum-dums. It's like, okay, that may be true, but how is this advancing liberty in any way? Like, we're getting taxed right now, right? There's a central bank. Our troops are being deployed to.
Right. I don't believe.
Really
I'm largely coming to the point that feminism is almost naturally an enemy of libertarianism. I don't know how it can be anything but that.
Sure.
Just because I've seen how bad it is. So
yeah,
I can understand. Yeah.
I was a little bit more sympathetic to her view once I kind of understood it. I guess that's what these young libertarians are facing in schools is this. And like all that stuff is totally foreign to me. I never grew up around that. I grew up on a farm. I didn't like how is some blue-haired person ranting crazy nonsense affect my life? What affects my life is the goddamn taxes, the regulations that say I can't even throw lawn darts in my backyard. I can't have a baby walker. I mean, to me, that was more important than some blue-haired nut ranting on a campus.
Well, one consistent group for me also, as far as opposing all this Corona nonsense, was what I would call the red pill men. They were all opposed to it.
Right.
I mean, and I've heard somebody like Andrew Tate talk about it. He said this was nuts. He said it was, and Andrew Tate said, I already had a low opinion of people before coronavirus. Yeah. My opinion was lower after that.
Well, I'm trying to remember though. I'd like to go back in time and look at some posts around January of 2020, because I remember some populist conservatives talking about this is why you're about to see why there's no libertarians in a pandemic, right?
Yeah,
and a bunch of people talking about how we need to do this or government needs to do that. They were scared of this thing, and they were all cheerleading government intervention, shutting down borders, shutting down flights.
Exactly.
We need a vaccine, blah blah blah. And then within a few months, their tune slowly started to change, and suddenly they were freedom fighters fighting for.
You are so right about that, and it just reminded me of somebody else. Let's talk about. Stefan Molyneux.
Hmm.
I mean, what's his deal? I mean, yeah, there's another person that, and I think he was talking about it, and saying, because this was the whole reason why Trump promoted it. Is he initially wanted to demonize China, and one of the first things he did was late January, we got to shut down flights to China,
Right.
And of course, and this ties in with the whole open with the whole, the whole immigration
Right.
derangement syndrome thing.
Yeah.
It initially came out of that.
And I mean, they were trotting out Russia as some bastion of this is how you do it, because they had their borders shut right down from China, right? No one's getting in there. See, no one there is going to get coronavirus.
And the one country, and I was following a guy a lot. The one country that was saner than a lot of them, not perfect, but Japan.
Right.
And nothing was happening in Japan. And it seemed, and even people like, it was something that was really, I don't know how that changed, but I think the left is smarter than the right on this. When the left recognizes useful idiots, they figure out a way to make use of them very quickly.
Right.
And again, they turned and as happened dozens of times before, they turned the conservatives into their useful idiots.
Yeah.
It's hardly ever went the other way. And I don't know, but what was also the reaction, in general of the Libertarian Party of Canada? Was it pretty strong against this? I mean, obviously it was a lot worse. And if you got involved with some of those people, like I know there's the Druthers newsletter and some other things out there that, I mean, they were having, you're in Alberta, but they were having rallies in Toronto almost every Saturday for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I was leader of the Libertarian Party up until I want to say, I think it was either summer or like September 2020 or September 21. I can't remember. So I led the party, but I mean, our party was I wrote a few blog pieces about how, you can't lock down the economy. You can't have these mandates. I remember being kind of nervous about putting it out because everyone, conservatives to the left, everyone, populists, they all wanted these mandates. And I'm like, well, shit, no, we can't have this. So I kind of put that across the thing and said, look, we weren't doing these things for the flu. Well, why were we doing this for coronavirus? The magnitude might be different, but what magnitude do you think locking down makes sense at? Like you're all acting out of fear kind of thing. I went to protests. I spoke in Ottawa at one Canada Day at 2021 and warned about the consequences of this huge, I call it a program in redistributing wealth from the poor and middle classes to the oligarchs and crony capitalists, and how this is going to lead to inflation. I mean, I predicted all this stuff, right? Of course, it was easy to see for a libertarian back then. So we're out there playing. But honestly, I just didn't have time to make a lot of noise because I was working overtime. We were in the middle of a pandemic, and during this pandemic, you remember how poorly they treated us people, us citizens. Well, they also times that by 10 if you were a healthcare worker, right? If you were a healthcare worker, you were expected to follow all these stupid or arbitrary rules that changed week to week. You were constantly shit on for being an object of compliance. And so at one point during the pandemic, 60% of paramedics, full-time paramedics in the city of Edmonton, were off on stress leave, not because of the shit they were seeing because of the pandemic, but because of all the COVID care and bureaucracy that was being foisted on them that ramped up all the shitty parts of the job and put them on steroids. And so your boy here was working overtime because, like I said, I was trying to extricate myself from leadership. I needed to make money because I put my family through, enough years of politics and feeding off our retirement savings, and it's trying to put us back financially. So, the PPC picked up a lot of steam, and kudos to Bernier for going across Canada. And I mean, if I was able to get paid to be an activist, I would have been going across Canada too, getting arrested and doing those things. But unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to run for the Conservative Party of Canada and spent, decades supporting and propping up the status quo before I decided to become a freedom fighter. I took the wrong route. I should have took Bernie's route.
Yeah, and I'm starting to wonder if how many of these pundits or whatever really were just they really didn't sincerely believe in this, but they just thought it was a way to grift. I honestly don't know who had sincere positions and who did not have sincere positions. It's really, I do have to say, as a libertarian, I was still much more black-pilled back in September of 2001. So what happened with coronavirus didn't really shock me that much, but
yeah,
it does seem like I don't really remember a lot of people that I thought were solid libertarians disappointing me in 2001, but I saw a lot of people in 2020 that disappointed me, and that was that I thought were really good disappointed me. And you can tell your Canadian friends that I think it impacted the Libertarian Party, and it was also just more prominent people that we thought were libertarians, like Penn Jillette, Penn Jillette.
Well, you realize, and look, this is true of so many people in the liberty movement and populist movement, right? It's like that there are a lot of people who kind of come to libertarianism from their feelings, right? They have a feeling that government's too big, or that there are globalists pulling all the strings, and libertarianism offers them a spot. They haven't read, Ayn Rand and Rothbard, and they haven't developed an intellectual framework. Their libertarianism isn't rooted in anything deep. Like, I put Penn Jillette kind of in this camp, right? Like, he's dealt with a lot of civic libertarians, and he hangs out with the reason guys, and he kind of comes at it from a skeptical point of view. But it isn't necessarily a fundamental principle or axiom that he hasn't thought very deeply about these issues, right? And so it's easy to get scared off of them. If you're scared, just imagine how many more libertarians we would have lost if this thing was 100% fatal, right? I mean, that would have been there would have been the temptation even for me to be like, well, fuck, government, do something, save us. Even in that case, but you step away from that fear for a second and think through this from first principles and from rationality, and you realize, no, government can't stop this thing anyways, and there's nothing it can do other than make things worse, other than destroy lives in the present to speculate that you might save lives in the future, right? And that's essentially what it always does. That's what it's did with coronavirus. It's like, we got to ruin these lives just in case a grandma in the future dies. And it's the same thing with their climate policies now. We got to impoverish people and ruin lives and kill people and cut them off from their source of life and energy, because people in the future might die from a climate catastrophe if we don't. Yeah. Well, that's fucking insane. And there's no evidence of that. And, anyways.
I assume that was most of this stuff done. It probably wasn't done at the national level. Was it more at the provincial level or the city level? Where was it the worst? I mean, I've asked people, was Doug Ford worse than Justin Trudeau? And they don't really know the answer to that question.
No. Yeah. So the mask mandates and things like that, and shutting down non-essential services, different things like that, shutting down schools, all that was done at the provincial level. There were some things done at the municipal level. Like, I think Montreal, the city had a curfew. That was, I think, a city policy. But most of it was done at the provincial level. But some of it was also done at the federal level. I mean, all the messaging came from the feds, right? We had Theresa Tam on there talking about how vaccines are safe and effective, how masks are needed to stop this thing, how, telling all these speculative things that she didn't know were true or not out there for Canadians to do. And then we had Justin Trudeau implement a vaccine passport policy for airlines. And so, things that were in the federal jurisdiction required mandates, required vaccine passports. So cut off a lot of people from travel. Then, of course, we had the shutting down of the borders for unvaccinated truckers, which basically sparked the big trucker convoy that everyone's heard about.
Yeah, I had Chris Harrigan talk about that back in Forum 6. So it was definitely, he's from New Brunswick. It was definitely something worth covering. It's and of course I had Daniel on. So I think you're the third Canadian I've had on so far, at least. Well, native born Canadian.
Right.
Giant Bandari's in Canada, and he's been on here a few times too. So it's
right.
Also, do you ever work with a guy named Scott? I know back when I worked at Liberty Magazine, there was a guy who worked there named Scott Reed. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Scott Reed. Yeah, I think he was a Conservative member of Parliament now, right? Yeah. I've heard about him. I've heard he's a libertarian, kind of a secret libertarian in there. I think there are a number of secret libertarians in the Conservative Party, right? There was one guy, I don't know if it was Scott Reed or not, who it was a MP from the Edmonton area. He got busted wearing a taxation is theft shirt. And the media made a big hubbub about this, and he's like, "Oh, I don't really believe that. That was just that just a talking point, just for discussion, just a funny shirt I was wearing." No, I think he really did believe that, but I think he's too cowardly to say he believes that. And so, I'm glad there's libertarians in there. I just think that these guys are naive to think that they can make any difference in government when they can't say, what they really mean. As Jordan Peterson says, you're constantly saying things that are lies or things that make you weak. I mean, how effective of a person are you going to be, right?
Yeah, you mentioned Jordan Peterson. What do you think about Jordan Peterson? Do you think he's taking? I mean, I know there's this nonsense going on with him right now, and they're going to try to deprogram him or deprogram.
Oh yeah. The College of Psychologists of Ontario or whatever.
He's got enough money. I don't know why. I don't know what his situation is, but if he's got enough money, I don't know why he just doesn't.
Well, he doesn't make any money from clinical psychology. I can't imagine anymore, and he could get licensed literally almost any other place he wants.
But speaking fees and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, he, at one point there he was making, I think, $100,000 a month on Patreon alone. But now he's, employed by the Daily Wire, and he's got all these things. I like Peterson. I like listening to him. I like his stuff. I've got no real issues with him at all. And I hate what I'm worried about what the psychological college is doing to him, because, look, I'm regulated by a college as well, the Alberta College of Paramedics. I mean, what is the content? Is this interview going to force that? I actually is
that like a union or a board or something? No, it's not a college as we think of it per se, right? I mean,
no, it's a college in the sense of it's a regulating body. It's they call it a self-governing body, right? So I was actually a board member on our College of Paramedics in Alberta for a while, and as a board member, we're self-regulating. So I'm a member regulating other members essentially on that board, and your job is to serve the public interest, whatever that means, to ensure, So it was an interesting experience, but yeah, one of the jobs of the college is to take complaints about your regulated members and investigate them and impose discipline if necessary. And so, it's not it's a government mandated college. On the one hand, it sounds nice because it's self-governing. We're governing ourselves, right? The idea of self-governance is a big American, but of course it's not really us governing ourselves. It's a mandate. Like it's not like we have competitors out there in certifying or regulating paramedics. It's like, from my perspective, it makes sense to have a certifying body that you can trust that says, yeah, this paramedic knows what he's doing. He's met the standard. You can trust him. I vetted him and put my stamp of seal of approval on him. And, maybe he pays a monthly or a yearly fee to maintain that certification and make sure go through constant vetting and whatever. But you want to have that important thing done
Mm-hmm.
in a marketplace of other certifying bodies saying, competing with each other to say, hey, our paramedics are better. They're the real Red Seal paramedics for X, Y, and Z reason. I mean, that's kind of what you want, right? But, so of course, these boards are captured completely by, diversity, equity, inclusion type stuff, and all the latest government claptrap that is coming down from the state level and filtering its way down through the corporate level.
I just thought of somebody else she actually liked one of my tweets once, but as the Libertarian Party of Canada tried to do any outreach to Jamie Salé. For people who don't know, this was a figure skater at the 2002 Winter Olympics who was involved in a controversial situation with the medal. She was in the pairs competition, but yes.
Yeah. You know what? I met her last year at a rally I was speaking at. So when the vaccine mandates came in, I wasn't doing the libertarian leader thing anymore, but I couldn't sit by because there was a number of firefighters I work with, really good guys, like guys you look up to and you want to model your career as a firefighter after. They weren't taking the vaccine and their jobs were threatened. And it wasn't because our employer threatened their jobs. It was because the Alberta government, because we're contracted to provide ambulance services to the provincial government. And the provincial government said, you must have this vaccine or you can't work with us. So they're like, so our employer's like, well, we don't want to force this on you, but I mean, you can't work for us if you don't have it now, apparently. Yeah. So we took the Alberta government to task. And I started an organization that raised $100,000 to mount a constitutional challenge to protect our firefighters. So I spoke at all these rallies, kind of anti-vax rallies across, the province, even though I wasn't an anti-vaxxer. In fact, I was happy to have my vaccine, but I didn't want to see these guys get dinged because of their personal choices. So I met Jamie at one of these rallies and I had no idea. I'm like, holy shit, you're Jamie Salé. I didn't know you were on our team here. And so that was a good, but no, we haven't reached out to her, but no, I know she is, her and Theo Fleury are kind of going around now, doing talks and
he's a hockey player, I believe.
I mean, he was bigger than Jamie Salé because he was like, Mr. Calgary Flame for years and years. He was like, but he got into, I mean, there's a good documentary about him. He got into drug addiction, was spending like $5 million a weekend on drugs and gambling and, you name it. And he has a history too of that he's very open about and kind of bravely talked about of the sexual abuse he suffered in minor hockey coming up through minor hockey and the predators that lurk there. So
that's quite sad. The Canadians still love their hockey though. I'm a Penguins fan, so I grew up.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we have Mario is still kind of a god in Pittsburgh. It's
right.
But Mario was the greatest. I think one of the greatest at scoring goals. But he's not even in Gretzky's league. Gretzky was just a great player overall. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Mario.
Yeah, I mean Gretzky might have been the greatest athlete of all time.
He just
the way he dominated.
I think the way he just had the, like you said, he said, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck is going to be, and that's just that's what you got to do. Yeah, but anyway, we'll get we'll get off of sports again. I don't even want to bring up that other sport that Americans don't understand called curling, but we can say,
I don't really understand it either, to be honest. I played it a few times. It's fun.
Canadians love their sports on ice, though. There's no doubt about that.
Well, what choice do we have? It's like we don't have any grass around here to play soccer or football most of the year. So everything we do has to be
what's
honest.
funny is I don't see that many prominent skiers come out of Canada, which is kind of interesting.
No, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. You know,
Yeah. It's
we
mostly
used to have the crazy
all sports
Canucks.
on ice. Yeah.
Yeah. Every now and then we
Yeah.
have one show up, but
Yeah. So if an American was going to move to Canada, which I doubt, and especially an American libertarian, where should that American go?
well, I think you should definitely, I guess it depends what you're doing. Are you retiring?
Yeah.
If you're retiring, I mean, the West Coast is beautiful, especially like Vancouver Island and those places.
Yeah, it's definitely beautiful over there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with more government and stuff, but if you're retiring, that's probably a great place to land up. If you're coming for opportunity, economic opportunity, get ahead in life and different things like that, you should think Alberta is probably the best province to be in, but also don't count out the territories. I mean, there's vast untamed wilderness and so much resources. Yes. It's for the hardy. The hardy people go up there and they mine gold or do something like that. And, it's very much the kind of Klondike spirit alive and well in those places. But
you don't mind the weather, yeah,
you're not going to have the amenities.
Yeah, it's definitely going to bring out something else in you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I should ever. I've been to Jasper, which is absolutely beautiful place. I've been to British Columbia a little bit. The area around the Thousands Islands. I mean, Canada's just all that's what sometimes you cross from America to Canada, you'll see. I mean, you'll see half or 1/4 the trash on the streets. It's just one thing that I can't appreciate about Canada. And I remember it was when Vancouver, I think, lost to Boston in the Stanley Cup Finals, and then all these people go out and riot, and then the next day, a bunch of people come out and say, "We're with brooms," and saying, "We're going to clean up our city."
Yeah.
That would never. I mean, that is one of the. I mean, for all of Canada's flaws, I love that. I don't know if that would happen in any large American city.
Right.
That's definitely one of the more. And obviously, you're staying there, so but you get a firefighter experience. I figure you could probably get a job any place, right? I mean, at least as a firefighter, because
maybe. I mean, it definitely is tempting to think about, but of course I've got kids and grown kids here.
Oh yeah,
Alberta. That's one of the main things keeping me here. I've thought about it though, because my bio dad is actually American, so I think I'm eligible for dual citizenship if I.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah. If you got an easy way to get a second citizenship, go after it just so you have it. So in case something happens.
Yeah, it's not super easy though, because I'd have to track him down. I mean, he knocked my mom up and kind of fled back to California. He was some California surf dude spreading his seed up the Western Seaboard, I think, and took off. So I kind of done like Google searches to try to find him, but it's probably not going to happen.
But ancestry citizenship is so much easier than most of the other ways, Tim. I guess my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were all born in America. I don't know of any option I would have via ancestry. It's so if you've got a parent, I mean, definitely it's, I think, worth searching out. I don't know how much work it is, but that's usually the one that also doesn't probably often has the least fees. You won't have the time limit. You can say, "Oh, my dad's American," and then you're
right.
Although being Canadian, Canada does one thing about Canadian citizenship. You can pretty easily go to Australia. You can go to New Zealand. You can go to Britain. You can go to almost all of the Commonwealth countries, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could go to Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
If you did go anywhere in the Commonwealth, where would you go? Or could go anywhere in the Commonwealth, where would you go?
Well, I think like to live or to visit?
To live, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd maybe consider Australia, but I don't know. I'd have to visit it first. It's hard to say. I've been to most of the countries except Australia. I've actually been to Tanzania and climbed Kilimanjaro and did the Tanzania stuff. But
you hiked up Kilimanjaro. Oh
yeah,
my goodness. Oh, how long did that take?
it was, I think, 6 days total.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's not a you could do it. Actually, one of our guides went up and
I've heard
down.
it's really a hike and not really a climb.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
still got to climb.
it's a
But
hike.
you don't
Yeah,
really have to. You don't really have to be a mountain. But you can. It's just like walking up the steps.
yeah, yeah. It
You
is.
can't.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't
There's like
you don't really
a
need
couple
mountaineering
places.
skills.
There's a couple places where you have to put your hand down, but you're never.
Yeah.
I don't think we were ever on rope or anything like that. It's
Yeah.
that, and you could. It's I can't remember how many kilometers. It's not super far, but yeah, it's kind of neat because you start in like plus 30 tropical rainforest and you end up in minus 30 barren ice cap kind of thing, snow blowing. And the thing is they make you do it. You have to take a minimum of 5 days to go up it. You can't go in a shorter period. Even though it's possible to do, like our guide went up and down in 18 hours
and stuff like
etc.
that.
Yeah. So you climb high, sleep low, climb high, sleep low, climb high, sleep low, kind of work your way up that way till you acclimatize. Cause I even got altitude sickness. I was feeling pretty weak and sick.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Last push there. It was just like a slog to get one foot in front of the other. But yeah. Tanzania was an interesting place.
If you haven't talked, you should definitely talk to Gary Johnson. He's done it too.
Yes, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Our twice-time president of Canada. He actually did all of them, I believe.
I think you're right. I think he did all 7 summits. Yeah,
and he talked about that too. You deal with that situation. You start out, in a really warm place, and you go up to this cold weather, and it's just
it's surreal.
It really gets you. Yeah. So And I guess, and I didn't ask you if you could live anywhere in Canada, where would you live? Would you just stay where you are, or probably?
Ooh, yeah, I mean, if I could see my family, if they were around, and different things like that, I'd probably love to live on Vancouver Island or something like that. I mean, I love the climate there. There's lots of activities. There's surfing. There's sailing. There's skiing. There's just beautiful rainforests, and I feel great when I'm on the island. Not so much great about the government there, but in terms of geography and just amenities and activities, that place is awesome.
Having spent 6 months in Washington, where we actually could get Vancouver or Victoria radio stations, I know exactly how beautiful that area is.
Yeah,
I did not make it over to Victoria, unfortunately, but you can go across to Port Angeles, and it is such a beautiful area, so unspoiled. I mean, of the 46 states I've been to, there's none prettier than the state of Washington, and
right,
I don't. British Columbia is probably as pretty as any of the provinces, at least of the. But I've heard they're real pretty. I've not been. I've been to 5 of the provinces, but
right.
And I've been, and those are all of the 5 major provinces. I've unfortunately not been to the Maritimes. I've not been to Manitoba, and I've not been to the ones up north. Well, some are provinces, some are territories. Yeah. How are those territories governed? By the way, are they governed do they have representation, or what's the deal with them? And
they do have representation. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if they're a premier, or what the head of the territory is called, but they're a little bit different. I'm not 100% sure. There's a lot less regulation, it seems, in those areas too. So, for example, if I wanted to work as a paramedic in the territories, I don't have to be. I don't think I have to belong to any kind of regulating body. I just have to show that I graduated a paramedic program, and I can go up there and work. I don't have to, different things like that. I think that they make it a lot easier for people to live and work there without all the red tape. It's just so.
Yeah. And so finally, what do you think about Bitcoin, and what are Canadians doing with Bitcoin? Anything happening like that up there, or is it pretty much? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's like anywhere. I mean, there's a lot of enthusiasts, and there's actually in Montreal, they had a building called Bitcoin Central, and they had a bunch of things going on there. They had Bitcoin, they had like crypto startups, they had a seasteading branch there. They had a mesh net. They had built basically a local internet that was off the grid in downtown Montreal, and they were doing some cool things there. So you run into things like that, but by and large, I think most Canadians kind of view Bitcoin as something to speculate wildly on, and not necessarily the paradigm changing currency that it could be.
Are all the college professors in Canada just socialists like they are? Well, Jordan Peterson accepted, but is it as bad in Canada as it is in America, or is it?
That's a good question. I mean, so I went to grad school actually in Victoria.
Yeah, there aren't that many colleges in Canada, I don't think. There's maybe only like 20 or something, but
there's not a huge amount. Victoria, certainly the professors there were inculcating us with some postmodernist thinking for sure. Talking about constructivist viewpoints and different things like that. But I'm not super familiar with it, but there's certainly a lot of left wing. I mean, certainly it's largely a left wing institution. I think when you, at least at the university level, I think when you start talking about colleges, where you're getting like nursing degrees and, agricultural degrees and different things like that, and trades, a lot less ideology involved in those places. There are a lot more people who work with their hands and get things done, who tend to be more about hard-nosed pragmatism and less about ideology. But
yeah, that's true. I don't know what are I guess is McGill probably the biggest elite college in Canada, or is what other ones?
Yeah, McGill's pretty big. I mean, the University of Alberta is a pretty big university. I think it's got something like 20,000 students.
I mean, as far as prestige, I mean
prestige,
more like the prestige, or not necessarily large, but just that's the has the reputation.
Yeah, I think McGill is. I don't know. I've always thought certain. It depends on the program as well, right? Like, medicine is pretty prestigious, I believe, at the U of A. Medicine and engineering. McGill is prestigious, I think, in terms of law. So but I've never grown up like with this idea that there's like an Ivy League college or university in Canada. They've all just kind of been interchangeable. It's like take a pick, whichever one you get into, kind of thing. It's one's not better than the other. It's just a degree's a degree, right? It's not like in the States but I'm sure the Laurentian elite are getting a very different story, right? They're probably being told, McGill's the place to go for all of you future lead lords of Canada to govern those imbeciles, especially out west.
Yeah. So I should ask this sooner, but how's the result of legal marijuana been? Let's give Canada cheers for that.
Yeah.
Completely legalizing marijuana.
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, it's definitely raised the price of cannabis.
Raised the price? Wow.
Because of all the legal hurdles. I mean, if you want to be a legal grower in Canada, you have to clear about $1 million worth of hurdles to become a grower, right? So that makes the product more expensive because because of all the regulation you have to follow.
Before because it was So I lower the price by making it illegal again. I've jokingly said this about insulin. If they want to lower the price of insulin, make it illegal.
Right. Yeah. So, I don't know how much. I think most people just get it on the white market here, even though it's more expensive because it's just more convenient and easier to get. It's like,
yes,
there's a dispensary pretty much everywhere. There's like a lot of them are actually going out of business because there's just, there's so much weed everywhere. It's like, it's too easy to get. But yeah, it is more expensive. I mean, I remember when it came in, we were looking at this and we're like, this is the wrong way to go about it. There's only like 26 growers, and the biggest growers, happen to be, well, one of them was, I think, Tweed, who's the owner of Tweed was also the CFO for Justin Trudeau's campaign. So of course that was one of the places that got Health Canada's stamp of approval to grow.
It's Tweed weed.
Yeah. I had a buddy who started at like a boutique cannabis business, and he had to do multiple rounds of funding. He had to spend 2 years jumping through regulatory hurdles, have like all these security measures, class 7 safes, and all these different things to get approval. And then it still took him a couple of years to get approval. So that's what makes it so expensive, is all these approvals growers have to go through. In the meantime, there were all these mom and pop growers, especially on around mainland Vancouver, who were growing weed forever and supplying stores down there. And they operated on kind of a gray market. Authorities knew what was going on, but they said, look, as long as there's no criminal activity happening here, no hard drugs, we're going to let this go. So it totally changed the scene in Vancouver and made things way more expensive there.
Yeah.
On the plus side, now the gray market is actually psychedelics. There's a gray market of psychedelics in Vancouver. There's a place you can get run by a former cannabis activist who was like shipping, going around Canada, planting cannabis seeds everywhere and handing people cannabis seeds just to plant everywhere. I'm trying to remember his name, but he started a store now.
Johnny Cannabis Seed. Yeah.
Yeah. He started a store now that sells like, you get shrooms and LSD and all these psychedelics there now. And they're letting them go. I mean, even though it's technically illegal, Vancouver is treating it the same way they treated cannabis dispensaries. And they said, well, it's illegal, but we're not going to enforce the law.
I get, it's probably also made it harder for kids to get it now too, because, that was always the joke, said, well, the marijuana seller never asks for ID, but if they have to be, now that it's legal, they probably are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, on one hand, but on the other hand, if you you just get it from your parents. You just, instead of raiding your parents' liquor cabinet, you're raiding their weed cabinet,
Yeah. What do you think the future holds for Canada? Do you think it might get better? Do you think it's going to get worse? Or
well, I think we're going to we're going to slowly ramp up statism and keep building the status bubble, and it's eventually going to pop, and then hopefully we get a chance for not a Klaus Schwab great reset, but a Tim Moen great reset, where we decentralize and realize the mistakes of our past and that sort of thing. I honestly don't know. I'm kind of black pilled on Canada, but I'm white pilled on the future. I think that that the pandemic made so many more libertarians and people that value freedom and realize how fragile our freedom is, even if they're not fully there yet, even if they're asking for the wrong prescriptions. At least that, the market is there now for us to plant our seeds, and hopefully they'll grow. So my hope is, and one of the things I've noticed in doing what I'm doing, running for prime minister, right? Was I ever going to become prime minister? No. But I thought something good could come out of speaking the truth. I don't know what that good would be. And one of the things I noticed is that every city I spoke in, every town I had meetups in, people were coming out of the shadows and seeing like-minded people. And it was like the remnant, right? It was like, here's the remnant. Here you all are. These are the people that need to have each other's back and are going to rebuild things when things go to hell in a handbasket. And so that gives me some hope, and that white pills me. It's like, okay, there are a lot of people out there who value freedom and who will, rebuild things. And, the people that are the leftists and the ideologues and these people will be irrelevant when it comes time for that.
Maybe so. I'd like to think about what's going to happen with Javier Milei, and also it looks like Canada has much more of a seems like a lot more open elections than America does. Uh,
What do you mean by that?
well. You have. I see lots of political parties. I
Oh, yeah, yeah.
see. I don't know, exactly how
Yeah.
how all the system works, but
Yeah,
America is just getting worse and worse. And
right.
I
Yes, you guys really have to fight for ballot access and for legitimacy and all this thing. It's very easy to start a political party in Canada. I think you just have to get, I don't know, a
yeah
few thousand signatures or something like that across the
yeah
country. And then to actually run for member of parliament, to get ballot access, to get my name on a ballot, all I have to do is get 100 signatures of local electors. And I don't even have to pay a fee anymore. I used to have to pay
yeah
$1,000, but the courts ruled that unconstitutional. And so
yeah
now I don't even have to. So it's very easy to get candidates on the ballot. But of course, we still essentially have a 3-party system. There's, instead of a 2-party system, and that doesn't necessarily make it any better. But it is nice sometimes having a minority government means that things can't get done that all the statists want to get done. So that is a benefit of having more than 2 parties kind of in the mix. I've gone back and forth on the idea of proportional representation. If we had some form of proportional representation or ranked vote ballots or something
ranked
like that,
choice voting,
ranked choice voting or something.
Voting,
Under some schemes, we could have had up to 7 seats in parliament. And I happen to think that could be a good idea. So that makes me kind of favor that, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I see government as like chasing that nut is time wasted that could be done doing other things. The most important work a libertarian can do, I think, right now is try to make more libertarians, and that's done through persuasion, right? And that's another thing populists have to learn. They have to learn the gentle art of persuasion and understanding the other side and connecting with them and meeting them at their level if they want to convince them. The idea that if I'm in a war with my wife, I'm not convincing her of my side ever, right? We're at the best case scenario, we're both doubling down on our side and we're agreeing to disagree, and we'll go to opposite ends of the house and we'll never connect. But if I really want to connect with my wife and change her mind, I have to be open to hearing her side. I have to be open to changing my mind. I have to, consider her needs, and I have to talk to her in a language that she can understand. I have to do all these things that are hard work and are difficult to do. But that's the work that must be done now. We have to approach people in a spirit of love and connection rather than hate and condescension or something like that. And it took me a long time to figure this out, because and it's still, I'm still a work in progress. I still like to bludgeon people over the head with reason and evidence, and I like to call them out publicly and do different things like that. And there's a time and a place for that. I mean, if I'm calling someone out publicly or debating someone, I'm not trying to convince them or persuade them. What I'm trying to do is persuade the audience that's watching this debate. But we have to think about what we're trying to do anytime we're in a conversation or anytime we're engaged in activism. What is it we're trying to do? What is it exactly we're trying to do here? I'm about to send out this tweet. What is my goal with this tweet? Is it, and is that a rational goal? And, just approach it from that way. And that's the most important thing I think we can do right now, because, every other way leads to ruin, as far as I can tell.
There's also, I've heard there's a free province project. They want to go to New Brunswick and take over New Brunswick. I don't know.
PEI, Prince Edward Island.
Oh, Prince Edward Island. Okay.
Yeah, it's because it's so small and it'd be easy to.
I wasn't sure why did I think it was New Brunswick? But
they're close. They're all.
Well, no, I thought I heard something about New Brunswick.
Oh, maybe there could have been another one. I mean, PEI is close there. It's close.
I don't know. I understand. Yeah, I don't know although it's the fact that Prince Edward Island can be easily cut off, but I don't know. I've never heard of being in Prince Edward Island. I've heard about it being in New Brunswick, but
maybe there's multiple.
So you don't. Well, if there's multiple, that's a complete waste.
Yeah.
There has to be one.
Yeah. I mean, I only ever heard about the free, there's some people in the Libertarian Party kicking the can on that. They started a Facebook page. They generated a bit of interest. Yeah. Then I haven't heard anything about it until you just brought it up now. So
try to get more of them to move to New Hampshire, which might be just as well too. But obviously, the whole citizenship thing.
Yeah.
But I definitely think constant. I'm not sure what I think anymore about. It seems like there's a large portion of the population that's just completely irredeemable at this point, and getting away from them is the solution. But it's really hard to say. Yeah. It's really hard to say. Yeah, but is it pretty easy to homeschool or unschool your kids up there, or that probably depends on the province as well. But
yeah, I think it depends on the province, but I think it's fairly easy. I mean, there are some like provincial reporting requirements, so I think you basically just have to let the government know your general curriculum and what your kid's up to all day. But I've heard from homeschoolers here that they don't really even care. They don't keep tabs on you that much if you homeschool. So I encourage people to do it. I'm trying to set up my life in such a way that when I have grandkids, they won't have to go to public school. It's tough when you're taxed as heavily as you are in Canada. Both parents generally have to work for you to make ends meet. And so now what do you do? Well, the easiest choice is to use school as a daycare so that you can go be a tax slave. I want to be in a position where my kids don't have to do that with my grandkids, where they can have the option of sending them to Grandpa Tim's School of Liberty or something.
I don't know where it's going to go. Well, this has been a good talk. Do you have anything else to say before we go?
No, just subscribe to my Substack. I haven't actually written anything on it yet, but I will one day. And when I do, it's going to be a banger, and you're not going to want to miss it. So check out my Substack, check out my podcast, The Tim Moen Show. It's on all the podcast feeds and on YouTube and Rumble. So I appreciate you having me on, Chris.
Yeah, I have a Substack I have a Substack. I've got, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow the channel, and give it a thumbs up, and go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.